Everyone who's ever watched an alien invasion movie has done the same thing. You're sitting there, popcorn in hand, watching the military get vaporized in the first 20 minutes, and somewhere in the back of your mind a thought flickers. What would I actually do? Not the Hollywood version where you somehow end up in a fighter jet or deliver a speech that saves mankind. The real version. The version where you're a regular person with a half-charged phone, 3 days of groceries, and absolutely no classified briefings. That version. Because here's the thing nobody in those movies ever addresses. The alien ship isn't actually what kills most people. It never is. What kills most people is everything that happens in the first 72 hours before the ship even does anything. And if you understand that one principle, you're already ahead of 98% of the population. Let's start with something real, because this conversation deserves real science, not movie logic. The moment any confirmed non-terrestrial craft enters Earth's atmosphere and becomes undeniable, not a blurry UAP video, not a leaked Pentagon memo, but undeniable, the first casualty isn't a city, it's the grid. Not necessarily because the aliens destroy it, because we do. Real-world blackout events and emergency management case studies consistently show that large-scale psychological shocks trigger cascading infrastructure failures through demand spikes, simultaneous emergency protocol activations, and human error chains, even without any physical damage. Multiply that by a global, species-level psychological event, and every government, every radar array, every civilian device activating at once, and the grid doesn't need a death ray. It collapses under the weight of collective human terror. And this is where the real survival calculus begins. Not with weapons, not with bunkers, but with electricity. Or, more precisely, with your complete and immediate independence from it. The people who historically survive large-scale infrastructure collapse fastest are not the ones with the most gear. They're the ones who stop needing the infrastructure the quickest. That mental transition from grid-dependent to grid-independent is the single most important cognitive shift you can make in the first 6 hours of any collapse scenario, alien or otherwise. Your phone becomes a flashlight and a clock. Your car becomes a generator and a shelter. Your refrigerator becomes a cooler with a 24-hour window before spoilage begins. Everything changes the second you stop expecting the lights to come back on and start operating as if they never will. Now here's where the EMP question actually gets interesting, because every alien invasion movie leans on it like a narrative crutch. Ship arrives, EMP pulse, everything electronic dies. Humanity is reduced to horses and bows. And while that's cinematically convenient, the real physics of electromagnetic pulse events are both more nuanced and, in some ways, more terrifying. A true high-altitude EMP, the kind generated by a nuclear detonation above the atmosphere, creates 3 distinct pulse components. The E1 component hits in nanoseconds and destroys microelectronics. The E3 component, which arrives later and lasts longer, induces currents in long conductors, like power lines and pipelines, and that's what actually takes down transformers and grid infrastructure at scale. The reason this matters for your survival is that your individual response needs to account for which electronics survive. Older vehicles with carbureted engines and minimal electronics? Probably fine. Your 2022 truck with 40 separate computer modules? Potentially a very expensive lawn ornament. Simple battery-powered radios from before the solid-state era? Functional. Your smart speaker that requires cloud connectivity to tell you the weather? Decorative. The practical implication is that your communication and mobility assets need a low-tech backup layer, not because the aliens will definitely generate an EMP, but because any grid-down scenario produces functionally identical results, and the question is always whether your backup layer exists before you need it. But here's what the movies never show you. The government response in the first 48 hours isn't heroic. It isn't coordinated. It's a bureaucratic avalanche of contradictory orders, information blackouts, and interagency territorial conflict. This isn't cynicism. This is documented. After Hurricane Katrina, after 9/11, after every major national shock event, the post-incident analysis tells the same story. The first 2 days are characterized by communication failures between agencies, incomplete situational awareness at every level of command, and decisions made on outdated or flatly wrong information. Now imagine that same institutional machinery trying to process the cognitive impossibility of confirmed alien contact, while simultaneously managing a panicking civilian population, a destabilized power grid, and military commanders who have no doctrine, no playbook, and no historical precedent for what they're looking at. The official response in the first 48 hours of a real alien event isn't going to save you. You need to be honest about that. What it will do is generate noise, and noise is dangerous in a specific, underappreciated way. Every rumor, every unverified broadcast before the platforms go dark, all of it competes with the one thing you actually need, which is accurate local information. Where is it safe? Where are people moving? Where are the roads blocked? Hollywood always shows the authorities providing clear, calm evacuation routes. Reality provides contradictory instructions from 4 different agencies simultaneously, half of which are based on intelligence that's already 40 minutes old. A battery-powered AM radio tuned to a single emergency broadcast station, verified as operational before the event, is worth more than 20 apps on a fully charged phone if the towers are down. Now, let's talk about the thing movies always get wrong in the most consequential way: where you should be. Every alien invasion film has the same geography of survival. Big city targets get destroyed, small town hero survives, rural family with a well and a garden weathers the storm. And while there's a kernel of biological logic there, population density is a risk multiplier for virtually any collapse scenario. The movie version glosses over the most dangerous moment in any mass evacuation, which is the road itself. The 2005 Hurricane Rita evacuation is one of the most instructive case studies in modern emergency management. Conducted by a population still traumatized from Katrina, the evacuation itself claimed dozens of lives to traffic, heat exhaustion, and vehicles running dry on 8-lane parking lots, while the storm's direct death toll, though significant, wasn't dramatically higher. The road is the kill zone. Any mass evacuation event, alien invasion, nuclear threat, pandemic origin point, turns every major highway into a parking lot within 4 to 6 hours of the trigger event. If you are not already moving in the first 90 minutes, you are making a different decision. You are sheltering in place, and you should own that decision rather than dying in traffic pretending otherwise. Sheltering in place, done correctly, is an active strategy with its own logic, its own timeline, and its own failure points. Picture this: you're on the 12th floor of a residential building. The inverter beeped its low battery warning 40 minutes ago and nobody reset it. The pressure cooker from lunch is still on the stove, warm. Outside, it's 43 degrees and getting hotter because the sun is doing what the sun always does, regardless of what is hovering over the city. You reach for the kitchen tap, and what comes out is a wheeze, a splutter, and then nothing. Because the municipal pumping station lost grid power 6 hours ago, and the pressure bled out slowly, quietly, like air escaping a tire you didn't know how to nail in it. You have half a bottle of mineral water and yesterday's rice. That is not a hypothetical. That is Tuesday in half the cities in this country during a normal summer, and it becomes acute survival within 72 hours in any collapse scenario. The municipal water system runs entirely on electrically powered pumps. Grid goes down, pressure fails within 12 to 24 hours, depending on local reservoir elevation. This is hydraulic engineering, not speculation. If you're sheltering in place, your first 6 hours need to be dedicated to filling every clean container you own. Bathtubs, pots, bottles, buckets, because what's in the pipes right now is already your last reliable supply. Here's the thing about the alien scenario specifically that separates it from every other collapse type, and it's a detail worth sitting with. In every other catastrophe, war, pandemic, earthquake, financial collapse, humans retain their position at the top of the threat hierarchy. Other humans are dangerous, but they're comprehensible. You can model their behavior, anticipate their choices, negotiate with them, outrun them, outwit them. In a genuine alien contact scenario, the threat model becomes completely undefined. You don't know the biological vector. Are they transmitting anything? You don't know the environmental impact. Are they altering atmosphere, electromagnetic fields, gravity? You don't know the targeting logic logic. Are populated areas the target, or infrastructure, or specific resources? This radical uncertainty is psychologically debilitating in a way that most survival frameworks don't account for, because most survival frameworks are built on the assumption that you can model the threat. When you can't, the human brain defaults to one of two equally dangerous responses: paralysis or reckless improvisation. The survival antidote to radical uncertainty is procedural thinking. You don't need to know what the aliens want. You need a short list of actions that improve your position regardless of what they want. Water secured? Check. Heat or shelter addressed? Check. Communication capability maintained? Check. Movement options identified? Check. 4 questions. When the enemy's intent is unknown, you secure your own position. That's not a metaphor, that's doctrine, and it applies as cleanly to a contact scenario as it does to any ambiguous battlefield. Everything else is noise until those 4 boxes are ticked. The panic variable is the one that survival manuals consistently underestimate and movies consistently overestimate. In films, panic is cinematic. It's screaming crowds and stampedes and people making spectacularly bad decisions for dramatic effect. In reality, human beings in acute threat situations more frequently display what disaster researchers call pro-social convergence. They move toward distress rather than away from it. They help strangers. They self-organize faster than any government directive could achieve. The World Trade Center evacuation studies showed that the majority of survivors held doors, helped injured colleagues, and coordinated movement with people they'd never met. The panic narrative is useful to governments managing post-event messaging, but it's not actually what humans do. What humans do is look for a leader. And in the absence of a government providing clear direction, which, as we've established, will be absent for at least the first 48 hours, the person in any group who projects calm, has a visible plan, and communicates clearly becomes the functional authority. You don't need rank, you need the appearance of having already thought this through, which, if you're watching this, you will have. Now imagine it's 72 hours in. The initial shock has settled into something grimmer and more grinding. Somewhere across the city, a dialysis center lost backup generator fuel 16 hours ago. 3 patients didn't make it through the night, not because of anything the visitors did, but because a supply truck that normally runs on a Tuesday didn't run on Tuesday. 2 neighborhoods over, the water treatment plant is still standing, completely undamaged, but the chlorine delivery that was supposed to arrive Monday morning is sitting on a truck in a warehouse because the driver evacuated his family and never came back. The water coming out of the pipes in that district is now running untreated. Nobody has officially announced this. A family drinks it. By Sunday, they're not talking about aliens anymore. They're talking about where to find oral rehydration salts. This is the cascade. This is the actual killer. Not the ship, not the weapons. The quiet compounding failure of every system that was always one missing truck driver away from breaking down. Every major catastrophe in recorded history follows this pattern. The 1918 flu pandemic's death toll was amplified enormously by the collapse of wartime medical infrastructure. The Chernobyl disaster's long-term casualties were shaped as much by the Soviet government's management failures as by the radiation itself. The alien ship is the trigger. What happens to human systems in its wake is the multiplier. And your survival architecture needs to be built around cascade resistance, not threat resistance, because you cannot prepare for the unknown thing, but you can absolutely prepare for the known vulnerabilities it will expose. Cascade-resistant personal infrastructure is not glamorous. It doesn't look like a bunker. It looks like a 30-day supply of any critical medication you take daily. It looks like thermal independence, the ability to stay warm or manage heat for 72 hours without grid power. It looks like 2 weeks of non-perishable food that requires no cooking infrastructure. It looks like physical cash in small denominations, because electronic payment systems go down with the grid and come back online last. It looks like a battery-powered or hand-crank radio that can receive emergency broadcasts without an internet connection. None of this requires military training. None of it requires a 6-figure investment. It requires forethought, a few $100s spread across several months, and the specific decision to take your own continuity seriously before a crisis forces the question. And here, finally, is the one thing that actually saves you. Not the EMP shield, not the underground bunker, not the military-grade communication gear. The one thing is this: being the person who already decided what they're going to do before it happens. The research on human performance in high-stress, novel scenarios is unambiguous. People who survive the first 72 hours of any catastrophic event disproportionately share one characteristic. They had already run the scenario in their heads. They had a framework. When the moment came, they weren't making decisions. They were executing decisions they'd already made. The crisis became a performance, not an improvisation. Here's what that looks like from the outside. Two neighbors, same building, same floor of whatever is sitting above the city. One of them spends the first hour cycling through news apps that stopped updating 40 minutes ago, waiting for someone in authority to explain what to do next. The other one fills the bathtub, pulls the emergency cash from the drawer, finds the hand crank radio, texts the family group with 3 sentences. Grid is probably gone, fill all containers now, meet at uncle's if we need to move. Same information, same resources, same threat. One of them is reactive. One of them already ran this. In every documented survival scenario, the gap between those two people is not intelligence, not strength, not gear. It's the decision made in advance to take the question seriously. The movie version of surviving an alien invasion ends with a monologue and a crowd of survivors cheering. The real version ends with one family, or one neighborhood, or one small group of people who kept their heads when everyone else was making decisions based on fear. Sitting around the battery-powered radio, water stored, medications secured, thermal needs addressed, listening for any signal that the world is beginning to reconstitute itself around them. That's not cinematic, but it's the only version of this story where you're still alive to tell it.